LiberalViewer presents.
So, having spent my first year of law school in San Diego, I'm very familiar with the huge Christian cross on the north side of town on top of Mount Soledad, visible for miles to everyone driving in and out of San Diego on Interstate 5, which both state and federal courts have found to be an unconstitutional government endorsement of religion, yet there was no mention of any courts finding the cross unconstitutional in the biased, misleading, but supposedly straight news coverage of the cross on the Fox News program Happening Now recently, beginning with the introduction that misleadingly referred to the cross as a war memorial multiple times from supposedly straight news anchor John Scott here.
A cross at a war memorial in San Diego sparking a constitutional battle. The Justice Department recently saying that the 29-foot-long cross is not a violation of the separation of church and state and should therefore remain on federal property. The cross has been on Mount Soledad since 1954. It is one of at least 4 war memorial crosses under legal fire from civil liberties groups. Now, its ultimate fate could rest in the hands of the U.S. Supreme Court.
And now, don't forget how Fox News anchor John Scott said there that the opponents of the cross are civil liberties groups, because that's a misleading label repeated later. But first, notice how the Fox News anchor referred to the cross as a war memorial twice in that 30-second segment, and the lower third chyron actually labeled it a war memorial cross, even though a cross has been on top of Mount Soledad since 1913, almost 40 years before the war it supposedly memorializes, as the federal court opinion from 2011 summarized the facts that both parties agreed on, also writing, quote, "Only after the legal controversy began in the late 1980s was a plaque added designating the site as a war memorial, along with substantial physical revisions honoring veterans," unquote. Yet, when supposedly straight news anchor John Scott brought on the 2 lawyers for one of Fox News' supposedly fair and balanced debates, he still framed his first question with another repetition of the false premise about the cross being a World War II war memorial in this clip.
This thing has been standing there for more than 60 years. It was built to honor the war dead of World War II. Rebecca, what's the problem with it?
Now, even though this first attorney, Rebecca Rose Woodland, appeared to be the one tasked with taking the side that the cross is a religious endorsement, no one really took that side, and Rebecca Rose Woodland even began her answer referring to the people on that side as civil liberties groups. And while it's true the ACLU has been part of the litigation, one fact that never made it into this Fox News story was that the lead plaintiff for much of the litigation was the group Jewish War Veterans of the United States of America. But like the fact the cross predated the war memorial, the fact that the Jewish war veterans brought the litigation wasn't in attorney Rebecca Rose Woodland's answer here.
Well, you know, we have some civil liberties unions who say and are fighting, vehemently fighting, saying that this is a religious artifact, and since it sits on federal land and there is a First Amendment prohibition against and separation of church and state and prohibition against the government having any religious artifacts on their land, this is saying this group, the civil liberties group, has been vehemently fighting for this, saying this needs to be removed because it represents religion on federal land.
So that's the closest anyone in this so-called fair and balanced segment came to representing the argument that this huge cross on federal land is an unconstitutional government endorsement of religion, though, as you'll see in a moment, that attorney, Rebecca Rose Woodland, actually explicitly favored keeping the cross later on, and the Fox News anchor John Scott also framed his next question in favor of keeping the cross, which you can see him ask to the other attorney, Ashley Merchant, in this clip.
But Ashley, at the time it was erected by people who, you know, that's the symbol that they chose. It is a Christian symbol, okay, but that's the symbol they chose.
And after the Fox News anchor's framing of the question in favor of keeping the cross there, the other attorney, Ashley Merchant, gave her argument in favor of keeping the cross, which was free of any pesky contradicting facts, as you can see in this clip.
Right, right. Unfortunately, the Establishment Clause does not have a grandfather clause. So just because it was done at a time that it was allowed, it can't really be grandfathered in. But I think that it should be allowed because it's more of a historical symbol versus a religious symbol. So I think the argument can be made that this isn't there for purposes of religion. It's not there for those purposes, which would violate the Establishment Clause. It's there more for historical purposes, to memorialize and to remember these people in a non-religious way, but more of a historical as a United States and as a union way.
Now, Attorney Ashley Merchant's argument there is okay in the abstract because the Supreme Court has ruled that monuments that are more historical than religious are not unconstitutional, but no one in this Fox News report ever mentioned the many facts specific to this case that undermine that argument. Not only has there been a cross on top of Mount Soledad since 1913, almost 40 years before the war it supposedly memorializes, but the current 1954 cross was dedicated on Easter Sunday in a Christian religious service that dedicated it not only to fallen soldiers, but also to Jesus Christ, with the hope that it would be, quote, a symbol in this pleasant land of thy great love and sacrifice for all mankind, unquote. The program for the ceremony actually referred to the cross as, quote, a gleaming white symbol of Christianity, unquote. Even worse, at the time the San Diego suburb of La Jolla erected this cross, the city didn't even allow Jews to live there. But of course, none of those facts about the history of the Mount Soledad cross made it into this Fox News story, where instead, supposedly straight news anchor John Scott went on to misquote the First Amendment in an important way in this clip.
Yeah, Rebecca, the Constitution says, you know, Congress shall not establish a religion, but it doesn't say that Congress has to ignore and pull up by the roots any religious artifact anywhere in the country.
Notice how Fox News anchor John Scott misquoted the First Amendment as saying Congress shall not establish a religion, when, in fact, as I discussed in my video, Is National Prayer Day Constitutional? The framers of the Constitution specifically rejected that narrow language for the broader Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, which the primary author of the First Amendment, James Madison, later explained meant anything like an establishment of religion, including an endorsement of a religion like the Mount Soledad Cross, at least an endorsement of religion according to almost every state and federal court to have ruled on the case, though, of course, no one in this Fox News segment ever mentioned any of those cases, and as attorney Rebecca Rose Woodland began answering the Fox News anchor's question, the so-called Fox News facts giving the case history in the background skipped over all those state and federal courts finding the cross unconstitutional to cherry-pick the few moments favorable to keeping the cross that were later overruled. And after flashing that incredibly biased case history in the background, this supposedly fair and balanced debate returned to attorney Rebecca Rose Woodland so she could remove any doubt that she's also in favor of keeping this cross, as you can see here.
Yes, I do agree that it was erected years ago and people have viewed it just as a memorial to those who really served for our country and preserve our freedom, the veterans.
So that might have been a good time to mention the Jewish war veterans who were plaintiffs in this case, or the history of anti-Semitism in the town that put the cross up, but instead, the supposedly straight news anchor John Scott made sure viewers knew which side Fox News was on by putting down anyone objecting to this huge cross on government land in the final Fox News spin of the segment here.
All right, well, hard to believe anybody's all that offended by this, but they say they are, and the argument goes on.
Now, whether people are offended isn't really the correct legal standard in this case, though if Fox News had explained the facts and history, some people might actually be offended, I think, but I want to know what you think. Would people be more likely to be offended by this huge Christian cross on government land if Fox News had explained it was erected by a town that didn't allow Jews during an Easter service, dedicating it to Jesus as a gleaming white symbol of Christianity? And applying the actual legal standard in this case, would a reasonable observer aware of the history and context of the Mount Soledad cross perceive it as a government endorsement of religion?
YouTube, you decide.